of Swords and Dragons, Royal Fae Guardians, written by Heather Renee, narrated by Vanessa Moyan. Chapter 1. I gazed at the morning horizon from the front porch, unsure of what I was going to do with my rare day off. The lavender sky and warm yellow sun called to me, making me want to go out to explore, but that would require too much effort when all I wanted to do was relax. I'd been on assignment after assignment for the council as of late, and even if it was almost too nice outside, I sighed and decided to stay home. I was determined to have today be a lazy day in which I did absolutely nothing. Closing my eyes, I leaned back in the cushioned chair, listening to the birds chirp and the rustle of leaves as a soft air blew through. Maybe I could still have my languid day and enjoy the nature that was Arvada. A loud thud sounded from behind me, and gone was the peace I'd been experiencing. In its place was a guardian ready to attack. Instead of a threat, all I found was my best friend. What the hell, Ryland? My morning was officially ruined, and he was going to pay the price for it. We have an assignment. He leaned against the porch railing, crossing his arms. I shook my head. Nope. Today is my day off. The only one in weeks. I have plans, one of which you've just interrupted. Come back tomorrow. He stormed across the porch. It's a dragon issue in the other world. Crap. I sighed. There would be no avoiding this. Dragons didn't come out of their caves in the fire sector often, and were too dangerous for their own good, at least from what I'd been taught. I'd never personally met one. Meet me at Oliver's as soon as you're ready, and we'll fill you in on what the council said. Ryland turned, and I shoved my foot into the back of his leg, making him buckle at the knees. That's for wrecking my day, I called out, but he ignored me as he disappeared without another word, and I knew I needed to hurry. Ryland was one of my two best friends. The other was Oliver. I'd known them since I'd begun guardian training more than 4 decades ago. Ryland had refined my skills and helped me channel my anger when my parents chose to leave Arvada and me behind. I'd had no idea where they went, and I no longer cared. Brooks and Delilah Atwater had taken me in, allowing me to stay in their spare bedroom since Ryland had already claimed the guest house most nights. I'd considered getting my own home by now, but the Atwaters had been forced to Earth when their daughter was born, and I now watched over their house with Ryland. Once I was dressed in jeans and a tank top, I went to the mirror, my emerald eyes staring back at me as I pulled my blonde hair in a high ponytail. Lastly, I slipped on my favorite strappy sandals before heading outside. I inhaled the fresh air and let the sun warm my skin, drawing the calm I'd been focusing on before I'd been rudely interrupted. I knew Ryland wanted me to hurry, but sometimes a girl just needed an extra minute. I double-checked the door was locked, then ported to Oliver's, a useful perk all Arvadans were capable of. Even though Oliver wasn't the one who barged in on my quiet time unannounced, I did the same to him and Ryland. You idiots still around? I called out as I threw open the door. The brain of the operation is here and ready to slay some dragons. Maybe we'll even find a princess for one of your ugly mugs. I chuckled at my own joke. They loved me whether they liked me or not. Neither of them was unappealing, though. While I'd never been attracted to them, I wasn't blind. Ryland rocked the I don't care vibe with his perfectly tossed russet hair and soulful brown eyes that stood out against tan skin. He also had the ability to control the winds, which might not sound exciting, but it could be intense to watch. Oliver was the complete opposite of Ryland. His blonde hair was unruly like the earth and plants he controlled with his elemental abilities. His skin was lighter than even mine, and his eyes were a soft cobalt. But what he lacked in color, he made up for in personality and skill. Oliver shuddered. Don't joke about princesses. I could use a few more decades to enjoy my freedom. I peeked at Ryland and could see the longing in his eyes. Even though he was only a couple years older than my 63 years, he was an old soul. It also didn't help he'd already found his princess, but she'd been killed nearly 2 decades ago. Ryland assumed that meant he had to spend the rest of his life alone, honoring the bond he'd had to Sarah, but I didn't believe it. Ryland was too good of a person for a life of solitude. Typically, Arvadans found their Meraki soulmate sometime between 20 and 40 years old. I tried not to be spiteful that I hadn't found mine, but I knew there was a reason for everything and trusted the fates. Plus, who needed a soulmate when I had these 2 idiots for best friends? A lie I told myself on a daily basis. Ryland cleared his throat.
I was in the other world a few days ago and saw the chaos. I'm surprised we weren't asked to step in sooner. Everyone is on edge, hostile, even. There's dark magic fueling the turmoil, so we'll need to be extra careful who we engage with. We can't risk being affected by whatever is happening.
I haven't sensed anything here. Do we need to worry about anything filtering into Arvada? I asked. Ryland frowned.
Not yet.
Arvada resided between the otherworld and Earth. Most of the people who lived here trained to be guardians who help keep dark magic out of Earth. Though on occasions like this, we also stepped in to help maintain the balance of the other world. I didn't mind it most days. I enjoyed a good battle, which was why Oliver and Ryland had accepted me as one of them. They knew it was better to be on my good side than my bad. So, what does the council expect us to do about the dragons? I asked, annoyed they hadn't called us all together to give us the assignment.
We need to travel through the Earth sector to find the Fire sector. The quickest way to get there without porting, which we won't be allowed to do, is through Meadow Lane, Web Jungle, Mineral Valley, and Inferno Ponds. Several other groups will be handling other situations around the other world, and we'll be on our own for the most part. We just don't have the exact location of the dragons, and it could take days to find them.
Oliver slapped his hand on Ryland's shoulder.
Don't stress. We've gone out on missions with less information and still won, but we've never been at such a disadvantage. I don't like being so limited in our abilities,
Ryland replied. Excuse me? Why can't we port? I asked.
Ryland sighed. Queen Navi put a block across all 4 sectors.
There's no way she can lift it for certain people? You know, like the ones trying to save her damn world? This isn't good if one of us gets hurt. Normally, the risk of death was minimal because we could port away before an injury got too bad. Having that option taken away from us made things much more complicated.
Unfortunately not. We're going to be on our own out there, from the sounds of it. We follow the map and hope we don't run into trouble before getting to the dragons. We'll need every ounce of our strength to face them,
Ryland answered. I tossed a fire orb in my hand, needing magic to distract me from the irritation of the mission. When are we supposed to leave? Oliver groaned.
At first light tomorrow. No sleeping in for us.
So I could have enjoyed my tranquil afternoon on the porch, but you chose to ruin my day off anyway? I glared at Ryland, and he just shrugged.
How about we go to the training fields and get some sparring and dragon defense practice in? I think Jordan needs to release some pent-up emotions. She seems a little grouchy this morning.
Oliver winked, a gleam in his blue eyes. You're on. Just remember this was your idea when you're crying on the ground later, I taunted.
Sparring is a good idea. Then we can all stay at the Outwaters instead of meeting up in the morning,
Ryland said, ignoring my and Oliver's ribbing. Sure thing, Dad, I mocked. He was always the responsible one, keeping Oliver and me out of trouble. I'll see the two of you in an hour. Don't forget your tissues. Without waiting for a reply, I walked out of the house and ported home. I already had a go bag for situations like this, so I didn't need to pack much. Just a few essentials and I'd be all set. One thing I was always prepared with was clothes. My wardrobe filled my closet and 3 dressers. The guys liked to tease me about my obsession with shopping, but I didn't care. I'd lived through decades of fashion trends and couldn't help myself. Even though most things weren't bought in Arvada, we only traded for necessities with no money ever exchanged. Guardians received bonuses after completed missions. Mine were almost always spent on clothes. When I arrived back at the house, I ventured into the kitchen to fill up on some food. I'd need the extra calories before sparring since my guys didn't take it easy on me. I made a turkey sandwich with all the toppings and added a salad on the side. Making myself comfortable on the couch, I ate my lunch with a smile, thinking about all the fun we were about to have in the other world. While the magical obstacles would prove to be challenging, I wouldn't let it ruin my mood for long. Even though I'd never faced a dragon before, the more I thought about it, the more eager I was to go on this mission.
Damn it, Jordan,
Ryland yelled at me, and I snickered.
Take it easy.
Oliver was pinned beneath my staff, choking from lack of air. I leaned in and whispered in his ear. Say, Jordan is the best fighter ever, and I'll let you up. He shook his head while trying unsuccessfully to buck me off him.
Never.
I dug my heels into his sides, hitting a pressure point. I can do this all night, Ollie. Ryland might have yelled at me just moments before, but I heard his low chuckle from across the field. He was enjoying this almost as much as I was. Oliver's face was turning 10 shades of red. I gave it less than a minute before he caved. His feeble attempts to beat me at my ground game had been cute the first few times, but he should have known by now that there was no point in trying to outmaneuver me when we wrestled.
"Fine. You're the best fighter,"
Oliver coughed out, and I lifted the pressure of the staff. "You forgot one part," I taunted before pushing back down.
"Seriously, Jordan?"
I held the staff down, watching his eyes bulge before he tapped my leg, and I let up once more.
"Jordan is the best fighter ever."
He glared at me, and I smirked. "That's a good boy." I patted his chest before jumping up and taking a few steps away. I had no doubt he'd retaliate eventually.
"Was that necessary?"
Ryland asked me. I grinned. It absolutely was. I have to keep you boys in check and remind you that I'm no damsel in distress. Ryland laughed so hard, he bent over holding his sides.
"I think we can manage that without you beating on us."
I shrugged my shoulders, mocking away. We were on the training field just beyond the town, and we'd been training hard for the last few hours. I grabbed my water bottle from the table and gulped down the whole thing. "You guys ready to call it a day? My beauty rest is just as important as my training."
"Yeah, I'd rather not have my ass kicked again. My ego can only handle so much of it,"
Oliver whined, as he lay down on the ground, utilizing his earth connection to recover from the beating. "Your ego needs to be put in check more often." I laughed. "So, back to the house and up tomorrow morning at 5? I cringed at my own words. I hated getting up that early. My body protested. A lot.
"If we stayed anywhere else, you'd be late, so that works,"
Ryland jested. I rolled my eyes and grabbed my workout bag. "See you losers later. Don't bother me until it's time to leave," I called out as I ported home. A steamy hot shower was calling my name, and I was determined to finish my evening the way my day had started, because mental health was just as important as physical. I may not have hands-on experience with the dragon, but I'd heard the stories. Our strengths were going to be put to the test over the next few days. If we weren't 100% ready for this, we were about to become dragon snacks. Chapter 2. Before the sun rose, I made my way downstairs, my body driven by the sweet aroma of coffee. The guys were smarter than I gave them credit for sometimes. If they had some sort of food waiting for me too, they'd really be on my good side. When I made it to the bottom of the stairs, I was assaulted by the scent of cinnamon rolls. I raced around the corner and snagged one before even muttering a polite good morning to my friends. The gooiness melted in my mouth, causing me to make inappropriate noises.
"You're welcome," Oliver grinned.
"Have I told you lately that I love you guys?" I asked around my mouthful of the treat, hoping they understood me. They laughed at my ridiculousness, but they really did know how to make sure I was in a good mood this early in the morning. Decades of friendship had taught them well.
"As soon as you receive your morning dose of caffeine, we'll take off,"
Ryland said between bites of his own breakfast.
"The earlier we start the trek toward the fire sector, the more time we'll have to find somewhere to stay for the night. I doubt we'll wrap this up in one day."
I let out a small sigh. A girl can dream, though. I attempted to savor my breakfast, but Ryland tapped his foot impatiently at me. I ignored him for as long as I could before he became relentless. "Okay, I'm done. Let me go grab my bag and sword."
"At least I packed already, jerk."
Ryland smirked at me.
"I didn't say anything."
I rolled my eyes and jogged back to my room. It was too early to argue with him. I grabbed my bag, attaching my sword sheath to it before swinging it onto my back. Normally, I preferred knives, but dragons were huge, and I wasn't going to get any closer to one than I had to. This sword was definitely still a favorite, though. It was lean and light, making it easy to handle. The hilt had a detailed carving of the main waterfall that channeled most of the magic to our world, along with flames around the backside to complement my elemental ability. The elves had made the sword from special metals that absorbed my power and allowed me to funnel extra magic through it, including my fire. Nothing screamed badass like a flaming sword, and it fit me perfectly. After adjusting the straps on my pack one last time, I decided to snag a boot dagger before heading back to the kitchen again. "All right, nerds, let's get this show on the road," I said. Oliver shoved another cinnamon roll in his mouth and nodded his head, proving he had no manners. Hurriedly, I made sure nothing was left on downstairs, and the breakfast mess was cleaned up, just in case Brooks or Delilah made an appearance. They'd been known to show up without notice for a quick check-in with the council members. Even though I'd always been told to treat this as my home, I still kept it as neat as I could at all times. Once we were outside, we ported to the waterfall that would take us to the other world. Porting only worked within the world we were on. We used gateways through the falls to get to the many different parts of the two worlds around us.
Ladies first.
Ryland gestured toward the entrance. I had no qualms about going first and walked through without pause. The travel between worlds was short, but stunning. I floated along the course surrounded by twinkling lights and a dark sky, pretending I was flying among the stars. A bright light emerged in front of me, confirming I was almost to the other world. I closed my eyes against the glare, and before I knew it, my feet made contact with the ground. I walked forward, not wanting Ryland and Oliver to come toppling down on me, and surveyed the area, relieved to not see anything out of the ordinary so far. The lands were mostly green in these parts, with spots of color popping up here and there. Red, yellow, orange, and purple were the most prominent, weaving their way through the landscape. A breeze ran through, making me shiver and want to curl up with a warm blanket and a cup of coffee.
"What the hell?"
Oliver groaned.
"Why is it so cold?"
"Don't be such a wuss," Ryland said from right behind him. "Children, we just got here. I don't want to hear any whining yet," I scolded with a grin.
"Whatever,"
they both replied in unison, and I laughed. They'd be so lost without me.
"Should we go to the market or head on out?"
Oliver asked. For once, I had no desire to go there and shop. With the lockdown on porting, I doubted anyone had hauled anything good in to sell or trade anyway. We just needed to be on our way and get this dragon business done with as soon as possible. Ryland spoke up before I could, though.
"We brought all the supplies we need, and I doubt there's anything we can glean from anyone inside that we haven't already learned from the council. Let's just get going."
I snatched the map from Ryland's hand and led the way. There were 4 sections to the other world that were originally created by the pure Fae who lived centuries ago and died in the Dark War, leaving only partial Fae beings like the 3 of us behind. Earth, wind, fire, and water lands made up the other world, and we were currently in the Earthlands. In order to reach the fire sector, where the dragons should be, we needed to go through 4 territories that consisted of very different terrains. While it wasn't the best way to get there, it was the shortest and the fastest, as long as we didn't run into too much trouble. The first one was Meadow Lane, which wasn't too far ahead. Most of the time, that area was safe. But we couldn't be lax. There was very little that was completely innocent in the other world, unless we were within one of the main areas surrounded by guards or shields. The second was Web Jungle. It consisted of obnoxious trees whose sole purpose seemed to be keeping people from passing through. There was no easy way to the other side except to ram through it in the straightest line possible. Next would be Mineral Valley, though the only dangers to us there were ourselves. We needed to be physically fit enough to tolerate the steep terrains and rugged paths. Lastly, and certainly most dangerous, was Inferno Ponds. It was where the fire sector began. Of all the guardians I'd known to be lost when crossing sections, Inferno Ponds was the one that usually did them in. We needed to be extra vigilant as we traveled further along. "Where should our stopping point be for the night?" I asked.
"Depends on how long it takes us to get through the first 2 valleys, but I'd prefer to stay in one of the caves in Mineral Valley," Ryland answered.
"I agree," Oliver chimed in.
"We're going to be exhausted after Web Jungle. Even if it's not night when we get to Mineral Valley, we'll need the rest before tackling the rocks leading to the ponds."
I glanced back at the map. According to the scale, it will take us about an hour to get through Meadow Valley. There are 2 forks in the path through. We need to take the left one first, then the right. After the 9th bend, we're only 10 minutes from the jungle. Instead of giving Ryland back his map, I put it in the side pocket of my pack and picked up speed.
"In a hurry to find yourself a dragon?"
Oliver teased. "We're sitting ducks out here. Of course I'm in a hurry. If you think for 1 second that we're safe right now, then you're not as smart as I rarely give you credit for." Realizing I had a point, they both glanced around as I focused on what was ahead of us. Nothing was out there that we could see, but I had no desire to wait and find out if there wasn't more we couldn't.
"Jordan's right," Ryland agreed.
All of us picked up the pace until we were jogging down the path, keeping an even speed without wasting too much energy. Within a half hour, we reached the first fork and took the left I'd seen on the map earlier. So far, so good. We hadn't come across anyone else, but our guards were still up. We didn't speak the entire time, choosing to stay focused on our surroundings. We came around another bend, and I could see the next split in the road. I threw my arms out and pushed Ryland and Oliver off the path, behind some brush. "You could have done that a little more gently," Oliver complained while rubbing his knees where he fell. "There's a centaur up ahead. He's standing in the middle of our path. I've never dealt with one. Have either of you?" I asked. Oliver shook his head as he crouched beside me, but Ryland nodded.
"Once, but it's been decades. He was a hustler. They usually turn a blind eye if you have something to bribe them with."
"Well, crap. Did you guys bring any valuables? I just brought clothes and food." Oliver rolled his eyes. "Why is that not surprising?" Ryland grinned, and I didn't like the way he was eyeing me. Whatever was about to come out of his mouth was going to make me want to throat punch him.
"Actually, you brought one valuable thing. Your sword."
I crossed my arms. "That would be a hard no. It's my favorite sword. You better find something else in your bag." Ryland shrugged.
"I have some gold pieces. We could try that first, but when he starts turning an angry shade of red, I suggest you hand over that sword."
I let out a heavy sigh. "Fine, but you better get me a new one."
"Sure, whatever you say, Jord."
As I stood up, I jabbed Ryland in his stomach with my elbow, garnering a painful grunt from him, and a smile of satisfaction appeared on my lips. "Well, we don't have all day. You guys coming?"
"You'll pay for that one when you least expect,"
Ryland grumbled, and they both joined me back on the path. We made it several more yards before we caught the centaur's attention. He was as large as a Clydesdale horse, with muscle upon muscle covering his torso. His horse body was a charcoal gray color, which matched perfectly with the long hair that hung down his back in wild waves. His eyes were a piercing silver that watched every step we made as we moved closer to him.
"What business do you have on this path?"
he demanded, voice deep and grumbly. I glanced at Ryland, gladly letting him take the lead since he'd dealt with one before.
"We're headed to the fire sector, and our business is with the dragons. If you would grant us access to the right fork, then we'll be on our way and you can go about your day." "Our Vaetans aren't that ill-informed," the centaur chided. "This is my path, and nobody gets by without payment. Show me your offering."
The centaur was a demanding asshat. If he wasn't 8 feet tall and made of muscle, I'd be begging Ryland to let me kick his ass. But I didn't feel like eating dirt. Ryland was right. I'd have to say goodbye to the one-of-a-kind blade. I swung my pack around and set it on the ground. I loosened the straps holding the sheath, then pulled the sword free. I gently stroked the blade, saying my goodbyes. It had been good to me, and I was going to miss it. This oaf better appreciate you, I thought, as I handed the weapon to Ryland and mentally cursed the beast standing tall before us.
"This sword was made by elves with the finest metals. It will also channel any magical power directed through the blade into an opponent. Is this a worthy offering?"
Damn. Ryland was being so much nicer than I would have been. I didn't have a political bone in my body.
"I want the girl, too."
For the first time in as long as I could remember, I was speechless. I quickly glanced between Ryland and Oliver, waiting for one of them to object, but nobody said a word. Finally, I shook off the stupor and placed one hand on my hip while snapping at the centaur with the other. "First, you don't talk about me like I'm not standing right here. It's rude. Second, I'm not a possession. You can't just demand to take me. I've already given you my favorite sword. That's more than enough payment. Unless you want us to come back with an army, I suggest you accept the damn weapon and step aside." The centaur trailed his gaze up and down my body, sending shivers of revulsion through my spine. He may be sexy on the top half, but I liked my men to have 2 legs, not 4. Once again, he ignored me, turning toward Ryland and Oliver.
"I prefer my females more docile. You said this sword is elven-made?"
I took a step forward to throttle this jerk for his snide comment, but Ryland threw his arm out, blocking me as I kicked my bag.
"Yes, purely elven-made."
The centaur eyed the sword more carefully, running his fingers along the sharp edges, and then, as if things couldn't get more uncomfortable, the freak licked the blade. A sound escaped my throat, and Ryland gave me the evil eye, one that told me if I said a single word, he'd likely tape my mouth shut.
"This is a worthy offering. Your group may pass this once. If you have to come back to my area again, bring a female with less of a mouth, or you won't be allowed through."
Oliver's hand found its way over my mouth before I could tell the oversized piece of trash where to shove the sword he'd just received. He barely managed to yank me away from the centaur when Ryland came around my other side, holding my pack, rushing us along. Once we were out of sight from the centaur, Oliver removed his hand, and we slowed down. That disgusting chauvinistic ass-gobbler! He doesn't deserve the kind of weapon you just willingly handed over. Oliver laughed, glancing at Ryland. And that is why I covered her mouth. The beast would have eaten us all for breakfast if you hadn't. Ryland shrugged. I rolled my eyes. They were probably right. Centaurs were fierce opponents, and we would have been in more trouble than we had time to handle if I started a fight with him, especially if he had friends nearby. But I would have gladly done it anyway. I hated men who thought they were better than women. I dealt with enough of them in my life. My mouth had no filter, and some men were too weak to handle it. I took my stuff from Ryland, trying but failing to hide my fury at giving up my sword, then grabbed my water before we began our trek through meadow lanes. The guys did the same. We didn't want to stop for any preventable reason while going through the varying terrains. I refused to be someone they told stories about because we never returned. Instead, they were going to tell stories about me because I slayed some dragons. Chapter 3. I was starting to freak out. Meadow Lanes was too docile. We were far enough through that I could see the beginnings of signs of web jungle. The trees grew more wild, taller, and denser. There was a wildness about the jungle that wasn't present in these meadows. I preferred the former. Quietness didn't sit well with me. My shoulders were tense from being on guard for the last half hour or so. Ryland and Oliver thought I was being paranoid, but I felt like something was following us. We just passed the 9th bend, so we're only about 10 minutes out from the next territory. Oliver repeated my earlier words. Are we pushing through or stopping? Pushing through, I stated at the same time Ryland said. Stopping. Why would you want to stop? I asked. You seriously don't get the vibe we're being followed? Some psycho being is waiting for us to put down our guards. I know it. Oliver surprised me by nodding his head in agreement, but Ryland still wasn't buying it. Why would whatever it is wait? It doesn't make sense. I rolled my eyes at him. This is the other world. Nothing makes sense. If you're that concerned with it, then we go straight through the jungle. But you'll have to watch our backs since you're without a sword now. My blood boiled at the thought of that oversized beast who'd taken it. You just had to remind me, didn't you? Ryland laughed. Figured it'd give you something else to think about for a while. We continued our journey, and still, nothing remarkable happened. The meadows were just fields filled with varying flowers and grass. Weeping willow trees could be seen from time to time, along with a stream that curved in and out of sight, keeping the area thriving. Still, nothing out of the ordinary ever crossed our path. The moment we officially left Meadow Lane, we entered web jungle, and it felt like I couldn't breathe anymore. While only a few steps from the meadows, the humidity was high with the trees, and the pressure bore down on us. I'm done. Let the dragons come to us. There's no way I'm spending hours getting lost in this bush, I whined. Toughen up, Buttercup. We are just getting started. Oliver grinned. I've heard some tall tales about inferno ponds, so think of this as training. It's only going to get worse from here, Ryland added. Thanks for the pep talk, guys. I'm so glad I have best friends to kick me while I'm down. The sarcasm was thick. They both had a good laugh at my expense, but I'd get them back. Eventually. I was a patient person when it came to revenge. For me, the anticipation was as enjoyable as the act itself. Hours passed, and the sun began to descend, which made me start to worry. I would never tell the guys, but I wasn't naive enough to believe we'd be safe much longer if we didn't find shelter. Being out at night in the middle of the other world and not being able to port was asking for trouble. Though, so far, the only kind we'd found were more than our fair share of spiders and snakes before catching the attention of some rather annoying monkeys. Oliver led the way, using his earth ability to move most of the vines out of our way. But he could only do so much without fear of exhausting himself, so he and Ryland still used swords to take out the most stubborn foliage that didn't want to get out of our path. The monkeys continued to follow us, but never came close enough to make me worry too much about them. They observed from the trees as their large forms swung from branch to branch. The animals had rough ebony fur, long arms and legs, and defined muscles on their torsos. I knew without a doubt that they could manhandle us, but it appeared the monkeys just wanted to make sure we had no other business in their territory besides passing through.
"Look,"
Ryland called out. I'd been paying so much attention to the monkeys, I hadn't noticed the light shining from the large boulder in the distance. The setting sun was reflecting off the minerals, giving us hope. I was exhausted and ready for sleep. It was taking us twice as long to get through the vines as it had the meadows.
"Probably another 15 minutes or so, and we should be out of here,"
Ryland added. And I could hear the smile in his statement. All of us were ready to be free from web jungle. Suddenly, the monkeys began to howl louder and swoop down closer. My pulse spiked, and I closed the distance between the three of us as Ryland furiously hacked at the vines in the way of our freedom.
"We're almost there. Just stay close,"
Ryland yelled above the monkey calls. I grabbed onto Oliver's bag to make sure I didn't get too distracted and pulled out my dagger. There were 3 giant apes coming my way, and I had no idea what they wanted. They were either trying to warn us to move quickly or they didn't want us to leave. Neither option appeared to be a good one.
"Jordan, duck!"
Ryland called out as he glanced back. Without thought, I dropped to the ground, turned, and positioned the dagger blade up over my chest. When my eyes focused after hitting my head on the dirt, there was a monkey in my face. Literally, nose to nose. I wanted to scream, but something in its eyes called to me. It blinked, and the enchantment was broken.
"What the hell is happening?"
Oliver yelled over the noise, but I couldn't see him through the wall of monkeys that now surrounded me. Their screams were in full force, causing the ache in my head to grow. The one in front of me reached out a hand, as if it wanted to help me up. Ryland called out a warning, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. A calm settled over me as I placed my hand in the chimp's palm, seeming not to have much control over my actions. Oliver joined in with the cautions, but the screams from the primates blocked them out.
"The darkness is coming for you,"
a voice whispered, but the monkey's mouth never moved.
"Run."
Holy crap. That was the creepiest thing ever, but I didn't second-guess the warning. I'd known something was after us as soon as we'd entered the meadows. I quickly nodded to the monkey and jumped to my feet. "Run!" I repeated the warning to Oliver and Ryland. The monkeys helped to clear the path, while the guides cut down whatever was still in our way, and I was right at their heels, keeping pace. I heard Oliver say we were almost to the exit, but before I could respond, I was yanked back and my mouth immediately covered with something furry, causing my screams to be muffled. My body was pulled farther away from my friends, and they had no idea it was even happening. Chapter 4. Whatever had covered my mouth was continuing to wrap around my face until I could no longer see. I managed to breathe, but my sight and hearing were soon cut off. I flailed my arms and legs around, landing a punch to something hairy, yet firm. Rapidly, vines enveloped my arms and legs. I was completely defenseless, and I was going to die. I was going to be a statistic. Damn it. I really wanted to fight some dragons, but now I was probably going to be a monkey snack instead.
"The less you struggle, the sooner we will get there,"
a deep baritone voice snapped at me before my hearing was taken away again. Yay me, I get to die sooner. I didn't listen to the warning of my captor, and soon felt the vines getting tighter, wishing I had my sword so I could fillet the furball. Harsh? Yes, but I was beginning to panic. I could barely breathe, and when I started to tire and stop squirming, the vines loosened. Maybe I should have taken the creature's advice to begin with, but that wasn't my style. Minutes passed before I began to hear monkeys again. Everything constricting me became more comforting until I was able to breathe normally again, though I still couldn't see anything until I was dropped unceremoniously to the ground with a thud. Ouch. My eyes blinked several times as my vision cleared up. I turned my head from side to side to find I was in some sort of hut made from vegetation. Bamboo and vines erected into the form of a teepee, and there were no windows that I could find above me, making me wonder how I'd ended up inside. Someone's throat cleared, bringing my attention to eye level in front of me. Well, it was more like something. A giant ape stood there, along with monkey minions at his side. The ape appeared very human-like in shape, but definitely not in size and features. Coarse brown hair covered most of his body, and he wore only cut-off tan shorts. Piercing black eyes stared at me until I finished my assessment. His minions were smaller monkeys with long tails, I shivered at the thought that one of those tails was likely wrapped around my face just moments ago. Disgusting. "What do you want?" I snapped at them. No point in beating around the bush. I was outnumbered. Though I still had a backup knife in my pack, I doubted it would do me any good against the brute who spoke.
"We saved your life. It would do you good to remember that and show some respect. My name is Titus, and you've brought darkness into my home. We should not have spared you, but we heard you're on a mission to stop the dragons. It's imperative that you succeed."
"You saved my life?" I screeched. "What about my friends? What happened to them?" If something hurt Ryland and Oliver, all hell was going to break loose around here. The darkness was not after them.
"They made it out of Web Jungle, but they are trying to get back in to come after you."
A self-satisfied grin appeared on my face. My guys would never leave without me.
Titus continued. "We have blocked their attempts so far, and will send you back to them soon, but we have business to discuss first."
"What business?" My curiosity piqued. Annoyed as I was at their methods, they confirmed my earlier unease, and if they knew what we were up against, I wanted to know as well. Titus nodded to one of his minions, who then scampered off.
"There is a serpent hell-bent on stopping you. He tried to get to you in the meadows, but the water there is blessed and he couldn't pass the stream you followed. Once you came into the jungle, my people kept him at bay for as long as they could, but the closer to the exit you got, the more relentless he became. Instead of risking more of our own, I told them to bring you to me. The serpent is not fast enough to keep up with my kin in the treetops."
"What does the serpent want with me? And why wouldn't it be after my friends, too?"
"It needs a female sacrifice. The males are of no concern to it."
"What? The actual hell? Sacrifice? Like they want to offer me up to their gods and get some reward for it? Not happening. I've already been told once today I'm not docile. Their gods probably wouldn't want me anyway." Titus grinned, making me shiver.
"Be that as it may, you've been marked. You and your friends won't make it through the Inferno Ponds to the fire sector alive. Too much darkness resides there now, and the serpent will have help. There is a secret entrance to a place called the Forbidden Tunnels in Mineral Valley. It is hard to find, but you must try. If you don't, there isn't much hope for you to succeed on your own."
I've had some really crappy pep talks today. People needed to have more faith in my ninja abilities. Got it. Darkness, evil serpent, secret entrances, no hope. I think I can handle that. Can I go back to my friends now? Titus nodded.
"One more thing."
One of his minions entered the room through a door that blended right into the wall of bamboo, and he was carrying a sword across both of his monkey hands. Wait a hot second. Not just any sword. My sword. How? Why? When? I stuttered out incomplete sentences.
"That doesn't matter. Just don't let it out of your possession again. You will need it if you plan to survive."
I nodded, having nothing else to say to Mr. Dark and Gloomy.
"The monkeys will take you back to your friends now. I suggest you find good cover to sleep tonight. If you don't find what you seek in Mineral Valley tomorrow, it's not likely you ever will."
Before I could respond, I was once again swept up, and the roof of the hut opened up on hinges that had been previously hidden from my view. I waved goodbye to the Monkey King and might have even flipped him off when he couldn't see for his depressing information. People really needed to be more positive. Always thinking the worst would only lead to the worst happening. As the monkey swung from tree to tree, I had all my senses as we flew through the foliage, and the two monkeys holding me worked together seamlessly. Each of them had a tail wrapped around one of my biceps and shoulders, using their strong arms to propel us through the jungle. It would have been nice if they had just approached us earlier and done this instead of letting some psycho serpent stalk me for hours, but whatever. Nothing I could do about it any longer. I was just ready to see Ryland and Oliver again. Just as I had that thought, I heard loud shouts.
"Where is she?"
Ryland demanded.
"If you don't give Jordan back, I'm going to rip those annoying tails right from your body,"
Oliver added angrily. The monkeys were taunting my guys while keeping them from entering the jungle again. I didn't know whether to be thankful or to laugh at the situation. "Easy now, boys," I called out. "I'm right here. No need for threats." They each mumbled something under their breath, and it was probably good I didn't hear it. The monkeys stopped on the last set of branches and began to swing me. Oh no, they were going to toss me out of web jungle. Literally. Ryland and Oliver realized it right after I did. They positioned themselves close together, and I braced for impact. Before I knew it, I was sailing into the sky and landed with a hard thud on top of Oliver. Ryland quickly pulled me up and ran his hands over my face and arms.
Are you okay? Did they hurt you? Where were you?
I dusted myself off and helped Oliver get up as well. I'm fine. They didn't hurt me. They actually saved me. I went over as much as I could remember in the moment and checked our surroundings. We need to find somewhere to rest. Now.
Or we could go hunting.
Oliver waggled his brows.
Not a chance. Jordan's right. We need to regroup and get our strength up again. Especially you, Oliver. You used a lot of magic to get us through that jungle. Then even more trying to get us back in. We'll sleep for a few hours and head out at first light.
Glancing up, the normally pale green sky grew darker, and I stifled a yawn. Of course I'm right. Let's go. Each of them shook their heads as we moved along swiftly through the rough terrain. I was dazzled by all the gems we passed, but Ryland warned me not to touch anything. Apparently, one didn't take from Mineral Valley without disastrous consequences. While I normally enjoyed testing the limits, after being swung through a jungle by monkeys, twice, I had zero desire to find out what consequences Ryland spoke of. At least, not today. An hour later, I'd managed to keep my hands to myself and our temporary resting place was set up. I picked at my dinner while wondering about the serpent, and using one hand to keep hold of my sword. I was never letting it go again.
Jordan, you and Oliver are first up for sleep. Hurry and finish eating,
Ryland said from the edge of the inlet we found in a rock mountain. I took a few more bites between yawns and nodded. Oliver snorted, likely surprised I hadn't argued. But we'd had a hell of a day, and I trusted Ryland with my life. With my pack behind my head, I slid down to lay in the dirt, uncaring that I was going to be filthy when I woke. Oliver did the same, and his arm looped through mine. Worried I'm going to go somewhere without you? I teased.
Yes, actually.
He fluffed his bag once more with his other hand and closed his eyes.
Night, Jordy.
Night, Ollie. I glanced at the entrance. Good night, Rye. He grunted and waved, keeping his eyes on the horizon. That serpent didn't have a chance in hell at getting the jump on us, but even still, I kept my sword tucked into my side. I'd fry up the bastard if it tried anything again. My eyes finally closed, and I drifted off to sleep, but the nothingness I craved wasn't around for long. Instead, I was swept into a vivid dream that had my heart pulsing. Hello, Jordan, guardian of Arvata. I bowed. Hello, Fate. Thank you for blessing me with your presence. The Fates didn't visit often, let alone to guardians. Normally, this kind of action was only reserved for the council members and royals. The golden-hued woman wrapped in a white silk gown sighed. I wish it was a blessing, Guardian, but I come with news that no one else could get to you. Crap. How can I be of service? The polite tone was hard to keep with the storm of emotions rising within me. A strange feeling, given I was supposed to be sleeping. It all felt very real. She glanced around the inlet, and I realized I was standing just beside my own body with Oliver still next to me, and Ryland studiously at the entrance, having not a clue of what was happening behind him. The dragon you're going to face is named Zendar. He has been spelled with dark magic, and uses it to force other clan members to attack anyone who doesn't stand with him. Dragons are turning against their own without having any understanding of their actions. Double crap. Fate continued. If you can stop Zendar, then his influence will be broken, and the mayhem being caused by the others should cease. If you can't locate him and stop his spell from spreading, then the consequences will be irreversible. All control over the dragons could be lost. I was never one to back down from a challenge, so I stood up straighter, prepared to accept whatever the fates needed us to do. Are we heading in the right direction? The gorilla Titus said we had to find a hidden tunnel, and it would take us to where we needed to go. I really hoped that was right, at least. She nodded. Look in the northeast sectors of the largest mountain in Mineral Valley. There, you will find what you need to succeed. Be covert and swift. Time is not on our side. Also, Remember, not everything is as you've been told." With those final mysterious words, darkness surrounded me again. But I didn't go back to sleep. Instead, I woke up feeling more refreshed than I'd been in days. I sat up slowly as not to disturb Oliver, his arm linking not working how he hoped. "Rye, I know who we're up against now," I said as he turned around. He frowned. "You've been laying there for less than 10 minutes. How was that?" "A fate visited me." He laughed until he realized I wasn't joining in. "You're serious?" "Dead." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Tell me everything." Chapter 5. After making plans with Ryland, we woke up Oliver, and since I already knew everything they were talking about, I ended up falling back to sleep. It wasn't long before someone was repeatedly jabbing me in my side, though. I took this to mean whoever continued to drive me crazy wanted to lose a limb. I swiftly kicked my feet out, knocking them on their ass, and climbed on top. "Why are you annoying me to death?" I snapped at Ryland. The smirk on his face said he had expected this reaction out of me, making my takedown a little less satisfying than it should have been. "Well, I tried softly whispering your name, but that didn't work. Prodding at you until you attacked seemed like the next logical step." I sneered at him. "Where's my breakfast?" "Over here," Oliver called out. I grinned at my current favorite friend. Their status changed by the hour depending on which one was driving me crazier. I really needed to find at least one of them a Meraki, so I'd have a girl on my side. I snatched the granola bar and dried fruit from Oliver while searching around for the coffee I smelled. Ryland moved up a few spots on my nice list again as he handed me a steaming cup of Life Force. It wasn't going to be the flavored kind I preferred, but campfire coffee was still good enough for me. "We need to leave soon. According to everything we pieced together yesterday, I think we're about 2 hours from the entrance to the Forbidden Tunnels. Well, that's if we find it right away." Ryland sighed. "We could be out there all day, and it might be right in front of us. I don't imagine there's going to be a sign above the entrance saying, 'Enter here.'" Ryland was right. We needed to get out there as quickly as possible and keep moving. I downed my coffee and gobbled up my food before getting up to throw some fresh clothes on. Once I was dressed and had my bag repacked, I met the guys outside of the cave's entrance. The warm yellow sun was rising in the once again pale green sky. I took a deep breath and soaked in the nature of the Earth sector. It was the calmest in all of the other world, and I really hoped we didn't fail, letting the dragons ruin that. "Let's get this show on the road," I said with more enthusiasm than I felt on the inside. What I really wanted to do was curl up in my bed at home and sleep until noon. Moving swiftly and quietly through the terrain, we had our guards up even more now that we knew what we were up against. Between the dragons and serpent, we couldn't be too vigilant. Conversation was kept to a minimum, and our full attention was on our surroundings. "Look over there." Ryland pointed to the left. "See how that whole side of the mountain shimmers in the sunlight, except the bottom right corner? Think that's worth checking out?" I pulled out the map to see if we were near the area Titus had told us to go to. Scanning it quickly, I located the mountain Ryland pointed to. It was right at the edge of the area we had circled. I turned the map toward the guys so they could see too. "It's not far off our path," Oliver said. "Let's check it out." Ryland and I nodded our agreement. I folded the map back up, sticking it in the center pocket of my bag. "All right, last one there has to let me give them a makeover when we get home." I didn't wait for their response before I took off running. My bag slapped against my back as my feet pounded on the hard ground. I was laughing at the grunts I heard behind me as the guys tried to catch up. I peeked to see if they were gaining on me, but before I could catch a glimpse of them, everything went dark. My feet lost traction, and my ass hit the ground. Hard. I began sliding down a dark hole, screaming my lungs out. I couldn't see a thing and had no idea where I was headed. The guys were going to lose it, considering I disappeared on them the day before as well. I just hoped they kept their wits about them long enough to find me before they got themselves into trouble. They didn't often do well without me. I was the backbone of the group, the responsible one. As I was potentially falling to my death, those thoughts brought a grin to my face. I was so not the responsible one. Ouch! I slammed into a hard surface as the tunnel curved, and my shoulders smashed into several more walls, before my battered body finally came to a hard stop on rough ground. There was no light down here, so I created a fire orb and shined it around my surroundings. The walls were filled with rubies of all different sizes. The individual facets reflected back as my light shone across the room. I took stock of myself once I realized I was alone and in no immediate danger. My arms were scraped up, and a trickle of blood ran down the side of my face. I rummaged through my bag and removed some bandages from the first aid kit I always kept handy. When I was as cleaned up as I was going to get, I stood back up and shined the orb around again, this time looking for an exit and calling for Ryland and Oliver, though I couldn't hear them and assumed they couldn't hear me either. Instead of attracting too much unwanted attention, I quieted down while continuing to inspect my surroundings. I couldn't find anything that would lead me out of the room I'd been dropped in, not even where I'd come from, but I did spot an out-of-place circle of diamonds along the furthest wall. I strode toward the cluster and, as I got closer, saw the diamonds weren't in a circle but arranged in some sort of symbol. The outer stones, which had first caught my eye, were about 1/2 inch in diameter and pointed. Smoother, more intricate ones were laid haphazardly throughout the center. They were absolutely mesmerizing. I ran my hand gently over them. The steel-colored walls was cool to the touch, while the diamonds emanated a slight amount of heat. Crap! I shoved my thumb in my mouth to staunch the blood. I must have cut it on one of the bigger diamonds. I glanced back up at the wall and my mouth dropped open. What in the actual hell? The few droplets of blood I had spilled on the wall began swirling through the stones. As my blood reached a stone, it would turn a crimson color and illuminate. I stared in fascination as this continued with each diamond. Once they were all shining brightly, I heard a groaning sound from the walls. Taking a step back, I watched as the wall separated and a hallway appeared. I dissolved my fireball, then glanced back one more time. I was worried if I went through this opening, I might never see my guys again. But considering they hadn't followed after me yet, I had to decide which was worse, staying put or exploring. Choosing the latter, because I knew that was what Ryland would have done, I stepped through the entrance. There were sconces on the wall already holding a steady flame and leading the way down a stone path. To where, I had no idea, but it had to be better than being stuck in the ruby room for the rest of my life. Maybe this is what the fate meant about us finding what we need to succeed. But it made no sense why I kept getting separated from Oliver and Ryland. I continued walking, then picked up speed, as carvings appeared on the walls. I recognized the etchings from the classes I'd attended during Guardian training in Arvada. There was a thick, winding line that ran through the middle, representing a serpentine river. On the top half were flying dragons, some breathing fire, while the rest soared the sky. Below the river line was an ancient language. Symbols ran along the bottom, telling a story that would likely give me nightmares. This was not good. Considering I was pretty sure I was still in Mineral Valley, I didn't even know how it was possible. But if these drawings were what I thought, I'd found myself in a dragon's lair, and my chances of making it out alone were slim. Chapter 6. Rumbles could be heard from up ahead. I slowed my pace and glanced around for another exit. All I saw were more gemstones and piles of gold. This dragon certainly liked its flair. Crap! I needed to get out of here quickly, before the dragon realized I'd invaded its space. I turned to go back the way I came. Locked in the first room was starting to sound better than being snack food to the beast I could hear moving around not very far from me. I made it 3 steps before being summoned. "Come here, child. You don't need to fear me." The dragon's voice was sweet and almost angelic. I would not let my guard down, but now I was curious. Was the crazy beast luring me in for an easy kill, or could she really be friendly? I shrugged my shoulders at that thought. Only one way to find out. I unstrapped my sword from my bag and unsheathed it, surprised to find it undamaged from my trip down the tunnels, though there were a few tears in my bag, making my outside pockets useless. I balanced the sword in my hands, pushing my flames through the metal. If I was going down, I'd at least do so like a badass, fighting a dragon. I tentatively stepped around the corner and sucked in a breath at the sight of the dragon in the cavern, not at all ready to attack. To top it off, the beast was gorgeous. Deep teal scales shimmered around her. Each one appeared to have a different variation of aqua blue. No two alike. Her eyes were a piercing silver color with ebony slits in the middle. She was average size for a dragon, seeming to be around 10 feet in height and twice the length. Definitely not the biggest I had heard about, but I imagined she could hold her own in a fight. Her wings were folded against her body, and I craved to see them extended. Her image matched her voice perfectly until she grinned at me. Well, I think she grinned. I was seeing teeth and hoping it was done in a friendly gesture. "Come in and have a seat." She nodded her head toward a rock that was shaped like a bench. Her mouth didn't move as she spoke, but her voice somehow still projected. "My name is Yila. Sorry to have brought you here under such circumstances, but when I felt you near, I didn't want to chance you getting away." I shook my head in confusion. This dragon was off her rocker and needed to do a bit more explaining. Felt me near? Care to elaborate on that tidbit for me? If this really was what the fate had been trying to say would help us succeed, she'd done a horrible job preparing me. "Your sword. It calls to me. It contains magic dragons can no longer access. More importantly, it is the only thing that will stop Zendar from destroying our kind." This dragon mentioned the same one the fate did, and I had my confirmation. Knowing I was no longer in danger, I pulled my magic back so the sword was no longer a threat, and examined it closer. "This sword right here? Are you sure? This was a gift from the elves. All they told me was that it could channel my power, nothing about being able to slay dragons in particular." Yila let out a snort, which caused me to squeal. Dragon snorts could be dangerous, and she was a little too close for my liking. "Of course they wouldn't. Elves only do things when they feel like it, but they knew exactly what they gave you when they did. That sword is the last object in all the worlds which can take down Zendar. He will come for you if he realizes the weapon is near, and he won't hesitate to kill you if we don't stop him. So, I'd recommend not using it like you just were until absolutely necessary." Holy crap. Thanks for the heads up, Fates, I thought sarcastically. It sounded like I was on a suicide mission now. What about my friends? Why did you leave them behind, and can we find them now? They're a little overprotective and are probably throwing a fit in their search to find me. Yila nodded. "You trust these men? You were running from them. I thought I might have been helping when I took only you." I smacked my hand against my forehead. "We're also competitive." I shrugged. "We were racing, and I was winning. They're my best friends and will have my back during any fight. I wouldn't want to do this without them." "Very well. I'll summon them. Probably best to do it now anyway, before they destroy any more of the minerals above. They're causing quite a bit of havoc up there." Yila closed her eyes and began humming softly. If she wasn't standing before me in her glorious dragon form, I would have believed her to be a siren. The melody she used was alluring. Before I knew it, a circular hole had opened in the ceiling. I stood up as Rylan dropped to the ground, followed by Oliver, who landed halfway on top of him. It was quite the sight. "About damn time you two showed up," I teased. They both scrambled to their feet and gave me hugs, barely allowing me to breathe until they realized we weren't alone. As soon as they saw Yila, I was thrown behind them while wind from Ryland began circling the cave, ready for attack. "Calm down, boys. She's friendly," I said, pushing forward. "Nobody put Jordan in the back." Ryland twisted his head toward me.
"Only you would fall down a hole and make friends with a dragon."
"I'm talented. What can I say? Speaking of, how did you do that?" I asked Yila. "Dragon magic." She grinned at me again with rows of razor-sharp teeth on display. Someone really needed to let her know how frightening that was. Though I would not be that someone. "All right then, let's leave it at that. What do we do now?" I asked.
"How about you tell us who this is?"
Oliver asked warily. "Don't be such a wuss. This is Yila. We're in her lair. My sword called to her, so she brought me here to ask for our help. I know why the Fates asked us to help with the dragon problem. Apparently, this sword is made from the only metals which can kill the beast causing all the mayhem in the other world." Ryland shook his head.
"Again, I say, only you."
I grinned at him. I was glad it was my sword. I loved a good fight, and this one seemed even more promising now that we had a dragon on our side. "I need to call on a couple members of my clan," Yila said. "If you want your friends to come with us, then they need their own dragons. We will be flying over most of the fire sector, unless you care to venture through it." Rylan and Oliver grinned widely at each other and spoke at the same time.
We'll take a dragon.
I sat back down and let Yila do her thing while finally taking the time to check out her home. Her lair was huge and cavernous. The ceiling was easily 50 feet high, and the cave was even wider than it was tall. More intriguing etchings of ancient symbols were carved into the walls, accented by rubies and diamonds. Fire sconces continued to light up the area, not only brightening the room, but keeping it warm as well. There were several dozen animal pelts in the corner, laid out where I assumed Yila relaxed or even slept, and nearby was a small waterfall that trickled down into a basin. With as big as the room was, I hoped it would be enough to hold 3 dragons, but just in case, I made a mental note to be as far off to the side as possible when they arrived, to avoid being an accidental casualty. Ryland and Oliver followed me back to the rock bench, sitting so that I was in the middle.
You really scared us, Geordie, Oliver whispered. We were blowing holes in the ground with orbs, but couldn't get anything to penetrate further than 4 or 5 feet down, and our elemental abilities were useless, Ryland added. Try not to do that again.
I gave them each a hug. I knew you guys loved me. Yila thought I was running from you, or she would have summoned all of us. Guess the race wasn't the best idea. I grinned. I so would have won, though.
Of course you would have, Oliver said condescendingly. So, you trust this dragon?
I shrugged. I'm pretty sure she's what the fate was speaking of. This dragon can help us succeed, and she's not at all like the dragons we've been told about in the past. If she was, we'd be dead already. Plus, she's pretty damn powerful if she can just call us to her like that.
As long as we don't get separated again, I'm good with it.
Ryland shuddered.
Twice within 24 hours is not what I call fun. Also, I wouldn't want to be the one to tell Brooks or Delilah that we lost their pseudo-daughter. They'd likely fire me as their protector and get me kicked out of Arvada or demoted. I quite like my life as it is and helping them, so don't die or get kidnapped again, please.
I patted Ryland's knee. I'm glad your life and job are your biggest concerns. I'll be sure to keep that in mind later. He let out a belly laugh, and it was good to hear. Oliver and I joined in, and the tension was released from all of us. As long as we managed to stick together, we'd make it out of this okay. Before I could voice any other opinions on the matter, the walls began to quake. The charcoal-colored rock opened up at the ceiling, allowing 2 mammoth-sized dragons to swoop in. I grabbed Ryland's and Oliver's arms, dragging them to the furthest corner in search of a safe haven. These beasts were massive, and their tails appeared to have a mind of their own. The first one to land was golden in color and had bronze, soulful eyes. Its tail was forked and barbed. Scars ran along its sides, telling of the years it had battled. The second dragon was slightly shorter than the first, but its width certainly made up for that. Its scales were smoky gray and silver intermingled together. Its tail was forked like the other dragon, but not barbed.
Welcome, Layden and Drake. These are our new friends.
Yila used her snout to gesture toward us, cowering in the corner. Very unguardian-like.
Jordan, Ryland, and Oliver will be helping us with Zendar. Jordan will be flying with me, and each of you will be responsible for one of the other guardians. We will prepare and rest tonight, then leave at first light tomorrow.
The silver one, I think he was Drake, eyed us carefully.
How do you know we can trust them?
He asked suspiciously.
Jordan, will you unsheath your sword again, please?
Yila asked, and I complied without pause.
Can you not sense the magic within her weapon? This is what we have been waiting for to defeat Zendar. They will be the key to our success.
I hadn't noticed the excitement from Yila earlier, but she was radiating with hope now. As nervous as I had been about going against dragons, I was happy to help if it meant keeping these ones safe. Nobody deserved to live in fear. Zendar needed to be stopped, and I would happily deliver his punishment. Drake nodded, while Layden remained silent. I wasn't sure what to think of our newest additions, but I was confident Ryland and Oliver could hold their own when the time came. I glanced at my guys, grinning at the expressions on both their faces. I was pretty sure none of us had been in the presence of even a single dragon before, let alone 3. So what now? I asked. Do we get a tour of this place and a warm bed to sleep in? Oliver elbowed me in the side. What? I asked. You can't tell me you don't want to see the inside of a dragon's lair. When are we going to have another opportunity like this?
Hopefully never.
Oliver groaned. He and Ryland didn't know how to fully embrace life sometimes. I, on the other hand, lived each day as if it was my last. It had been a promise I'd made to myself after my parents leaving me nearly broke me. "I'd be happy to give you a tour, Jordan. It's the least I can do, considering you didn't run for the hills when you saw me for the first time." She grinned again, and I couldn't take it any longer. "Hila, you are a magnificent creature. Absolutely stunning. But please, for the greater good, don't smile. Your teeth freak me out and remind me I should have run from you." Ryland and Oliver stiffened, while the other 3 dragons before us snorted, in what I assumed was their form of laughter. Small puffs of smoke came out of their nostrils, and their eyes squeezed closed. "I'll keep that in mind. Your honesty is something to be admired, young one." I elbowed the guys and glared at them. At least someone appreciates it. "Drake and Layden, you're welcome to your usual rooms here, or you can join us in the morning. Which is better?" Hila asked her dragon friends. Since he hadn't spoken yet, it surprised me when Layden answered first.
"We'll stay here, just in case. With the sword present, we all need to be ready at a moment's notice."
The tenor of his voice was deep and rough, making me wonder if his vocal cords had been damaged in a fight at one point, but I saw no scars around his neck to confirm it. "I agree. Be ready at first light, then." The massive beasts pounded their way toward the enormous doorway leading to the tunnels opposite of where I had first arrived. Once they were out of sight, Hila turned back to the 3 of us. "Who's ready for a tour?" I grinned widely and nodded my head, while Ryland tried to stifle a groan. I was going to make these guys live more dangerously if it was the last thing I did. "Right this way." Hila swung her body around, her tail missing us by mere inches. Oliver and Ryland flinched, glaring at me.
"She's leading us to our deaths,"
Ryland complained. I promptly ignored him and skipped after my new favorite friend. My guys had just been demoted. Chapter 7. Morning came way too soon after the previous day's exhaustion. Once the adrenaline wore off that night, thoughts about the day filtered through. A giant snake wanted me dead. I'd been kidnapped by monkeys, then again by a dragon. Thankfully, only one of the 3 meant me harm. The beds Hila had provided us were made from animal pelts, but on a much smaller scale than the ones I had seen when I first arrived in the lair. The bed was warm and comfortable, ensuring I slept like the dead once I was able to quiet my thoughts. Ryland and Oliver shared a bed with me, both having been too afraid to have us separated in the slightest. Big babies. I didn't mind, though. We used to have sleepovers like this when we were younger, and I had forgotten how fun they could be.
"You still snore when you sleep,"
Ryland complained as we got up for the day. "You still annoy me on a daily basis, so I guess we're even." I stuck my tongue out at him and we went to the makeshift bathroom. There was a hole in a rock seat that was supposed to be the toilet, and a small water feature opposite the toilet where I could wash up a little. I laughed at myself as I hovered over the rock and attempted to pee without actually touching the cold stone, but nearly fell in instead. I finished washing up and changed into my clothes. Once I was back in the room, I unhooked my sword from my bag and strapped it to my back. Anything we didn't absolutely need would be left here. There was no sense in having anything extra to hold us back. I snagged my knife at the last minute and shoved it into my boot. One could never have too many sharp objects. "Who's ready to go slay some dragons?" I grinned wickedly at my best friends.
"Some days, I really worry about your sanity,"
Oliver said seriously, causing my grin to expand even more.
"Let's go find Hila and see if the others are ready,"
Ryland suggested. The guys finished strapping their own weapons to themselves, and we headed down the hallway. The closer we got to the dragons, the more tension rolled off my friends. I tried my usual joking, but nothing was lightening their sour moods. Getting annoyed by my lack of success, I stopped trying, in case they succeeded in bringing me down with them. "Good morning, young one," Hila spoke as we came around the corner. "Good morning, large dragon." My grin returned. Glad to see someone else is cheerful. Normally, I'm the grump in the mornings, but Tweedledee and Tweedledum over there decided to take that role today. Hila tossed her head from side to side, but said nothing else. Layden and Drake were already in the cavernous room, observing us. We were offered breakfast, which included an assortment of fruits and greens. I was curious about how they appeared and asked as much. Dragon magic. The same answer she had used yesterday. I pondered what else her dragon magic could do. There was so much unknown with these beasts. Their clans didn't socialize with other species in the other world, so they were often labeled a danger, something I believed until just yesterday. People were afraid of the unknown, but in this case, I knew the people had been wrong, or at least partially. Maybe if the dragons hadn't been feared for so long, we wouldn't be in the situation we were currently in. After we were fed, Yila opened up the ceiling to her lair once more and glanced at me with a twinkle in her eyes. Ready to hop on? Hell yes. I fist-pumped the air and ran for her tail. Before I made it 2 steps, my body was yanked back. Are you sure about this? Ryland whispered. The look of worry in his creased face had mine softening. Yes, I'm very sure. Trust me, okay? Ryland nodded and let go. I resumed my sprint toward Yila and climbed up her tail. Her scales were coarse and sharp, so I had to be careful. Once I was settled, my legs found a comfortable spot at the base of the dragon's neck, and I held on to the small horns that crept toward the top of her head. The horns were ebony, standing out against her glossy teal scales that weren't as warm as I expected, given she breathed fire. I peeked over at Ryland and Oliver. They were each mounting their designated dragon, but with much less enthusiasm than I had. Ryland went with Drake, and Oliver with Layden. Once everyone was situated, Yila led the way as she flapped her powerful wings up and down. They were smooth but thick like leather, and the edges were covered in scales that matched the rest of her body with sharp barbs I'd missed before on each corner of the wings. Her pace remained steady until we cleared the ceiling, and then we soared. I was flying with a dragon. Holy crap! Best day ever. Wind blew across my face, and I closed my eyes briefly, sighing at the bliss rolling through me. Even though there was a good chance we could all die against the dragon we were supposed to fight, I pushed that aside and soaked in the moment. When I reopened my eyes, I took in the sights. We were several hundred feet above Mineral Valley. I watched in amazement as the final pieces of rock came back together that led to Yila's lair. Dragon magic was pure and astonishing. I could see web jungle behind us. It looked quiet and peaceful, but I knew otherwise. I would never be venturing through there again, if I could help it. Inferno Ponds was soon upon us, and we were officially in the fire sector. Heat from the eternal flames grazed us, so I pulled my legs up a little higher to be safe. I had no desire to find out how far of a reach those flames had. How are you doing back there? Yila called to me. Better than I thought I would be, I laughed. You've got some steady wings, my friend. Yila snorted, then went back to focusing on flying. Ryland and Oliver were next to me, finally looking more relaxed. The creases from Ryland's forehead seemed to have smoothed out for the time being. The man was going to age quicker than all of us if he didn't learn how to live a little. I knew he'd had his heart broken, and I couldn't understand how that felt, but it wouldn't stop me from trying to make sure he lived the rest of his life as best he could. Oliver, on the other hand, switched from Team Jordan to Team Ryland, and back again almost as often as the sky went from day to night. He evened out our trio nicely, though I'd never tell him that. My guys didn't need me to inflate their egos anymore by telling them how awesome they were. Drake and Ryland soared a little closer, so we were within yelling distance. How you doing, old man? I called. Ryland gave me the middle finger and whispered something to Drake. Before I knew it, they took off like a bat out of hell, which made me giggle snort, considering he was riding a dragon over Inferno Ponds. Yila, do not let them win. I punctuated each word, making sure my point was made. You got it. I could hear the grin in the timbre of her voice, thankful I couldn't see all her pointy teeth this time. I held on tighter and pressed my legs more firmly into her scales. Out here in the sun, they appeared more aqua than teal, as the light reflected off of them. The faster she went, the cooler the scales became against my skin. So cold, in fact, that I began to shiver. Why is it so cold? I asked. Oops, dragon magic. No way. That's not working anymore. Spill it, dragon. I was giving the back of her massive head the don't mess with me look, but it was wasted. She didn't glance my way, which made me pout in return. Our bodies change with the elements and with how much magic we use, or what we're using it for. Like right now, we're having fun and I'm using dragon magic to accelerate my speed. Since I'm in no danger, my body is cooling. If I was in danger, my body would heat up significantly. The elements also affect the coloring of my scales. You likely noticed I appeared more teal to you in my home. Yet now, my scales are light blue. The sun changes them, but if I was lower to the terrain, then my surroundings could influence the color as well, allowing me to camouflage. That is badass, Hila. I have to admit, I'm slightly jealous. Now, back to the task at hand. Oliver is gaining on us, and Ryland is still ahead. Let's make these boys eat dust and show them who's boss. Hila roared, and, not so surprisingly, her speed kicked up another few notches. I laughed and grinned the entire time, completely forgetting we were potentially flying to our deaths. Those thoughts could shove it until the threats were nearer. Once we passed Ryland and the outer limits of Inferno Ponds, Hila began our descent to the ground. According to what we'd been told the night before, we were going to follow the Serpentine River on foot for a while and see if we could pick up anything new while on the ground. Shockingly enough, with as massive as the dragons were, their landings were graceful and smooth. Hila lowered herself to the ground so I could slide off her easier. Ryland and Oliver were right behind us and dismounted just as quickly, giving their dragon escorts manly pats on the side.
We never had a chance, but it was fun to try anyway, Oliver joked. That it was.
Layden nodded his colossal head. I smiled as I realized that my guys seemed to have bonded a little with our new friends. I was worried their hesitation would make this whole situation harder than it needed to be. We already had an evil psycho dragon to contend with, and possibly a killer snake if he'd managed to follow us somehow. I didn't want to add anything else to the agenda. We didn't get to cover the entire plan last night, I said once everyone was together. I know we're on foot for a while, but what next? The canopy of trees is really thick through this part of the river. Zendar and the others working with him could be anywhere between here and the 7th bend of the river. Until our view isn't restricted, we need to be on the ground, Hila answered.
What happens when we get to the 7th bend?
Ryland asked before I could. Layden answered this time, grinning even creepier than Hila.
Then we fight.
I like your attitude. I'm all for a good fight, but please leave the grinning for the people you want to scare. I shuddered once more as each of the 3 dragons snorted out in amusement. Am I the only one who quakes at the sight of all those killer teeth?
Yes, I think you are,
Ryland teased. Well then, let's get moving, I said after giving Ryland a quick glare and deciding to change the subject. I'm ready to be back in the sky.
Addicting, isn't it?
Drake asked, his heavy feet stomping just a few paces away from me. I nodded enthusiastically before catching up to Ryland and Oliver, who had already moved several yards ahead of me. You guys feeling better about our new friends now?
Yeah, Oliver answered first. The flight time gave me a chance to drill Layden. They're good dragons, and I'm glad we're here to help them.
Ryland nodded in agreement.
We'll take care of Zendar and make sure the good dragons don't take the blame for this idiot and his minions.
I loved my guys. They really were the best. After the first 20 minutes or so, Hila froze, halting the rest of us without a word. I strained to hear whatever she might have, but I got nothing. I looked to Ryland and Oliver, but they each shrugged their shoulders. I inched closer to Hila, but she was intently focused on whatever was up ahead. I waited not so patiently for her to acknowledge me and tell us what was going on. I was seconds from tapping my foot and clearing my throat when she lowered her head to me. There are 2 dragons up ahead. They're young, maybe a century old. I can't quite make out their conversation, but I can sense Zendar's magic on them. So what do we do? Go in breathing fire and swinging swords? I asked, eager to finally be doing something other than traveling. No, we don't know they're a danger. Zendar has forced a lot of good dragons to do things they normally wouldn't. Let's get closer and see what we can learn first. I let out a disappointed sigh, and Ryland patted me on the back.
Always so thirsty for bloodshed.
Only when we're stopping evil beings from wreaking havoc on the goodness of the world. I smirked. I dream of these opportunities.
Only you, my friend.
That's why you love me. Layden shushed us and brought our attention back to the matter at hand. I mouthed, sorry, realizing if Hila had heard the dragons, there was a chance they could hear us. Each corner we came around, I expected to come upon the dragons, but it was another 10 or so minutes before Hila stopped us again. How she had heard anything from that far away amazed me, but I wasn't going to ask, already knowing her answer would be the same as each time before. Dragon magic.
Come on, dude. Why are we even here?
You know what he's doing is wrong, a young male voice said. Dragon years were way different from any other supernatural I knew. Even though Yila thought they were around a century old, technically, they were still teenagers mentally.
Don't be such a wuss. If you want to survive, you need to shut your mouth and do as you're told.
Is it so wrong that I don't want to hurt people just because someone else tells me to? This time, the tone of his voice was sad and hopeless.
Yes, it is.
The hardness of the second dragon's voice gave me shivers. I was ready to slice this ass gobbler's head off. I reached for my sword, but rough scales rubbed against my arm. Drake shook his head at me, and, once again, disappointment crashed into me. When am I going to get to draw blood? Yila let out a melody so hypnotic my eyes began to droop. My knees grew weak, and I leaned against Oliver, who didn't seem any better off than me. Layden noticed and immediately blew in our faces with an icy blast. What the hell was that for? I screeched. Layden shrugged.
Only way to keep you out of the trance.
Damn dragon magic. Neo, wake up! The young dragon shrieked. Yila, Drake, and Layden moved through the trees and appeared before the young forest green dragon still awake. I heard his intake of breath before the begging began. He thought we were here to kill him.
Calm down, little one. What is your name? Drake asked.
Court, what did you do to my brother? He snapped, moving his eyes between us and the russet-colored dragon at his feet. He's in a deep sleep, but he'll be just fine, I promise, Yila said softly. We heard your conversation, and we mean you no harm as long as you agree to stay here with your brother. Court swung his head around, finally noticing us. Why are you here? He asked suspiciously.
We're here to stop Zendar,
Layden stated.
From the conversation we overheard, it didn't sound like you would have a problem with that.
What will become of Neo? Yila stepped closer. The sleep will only last for 2 moon cycles. If he wakes and sees reason, then you'll likely never see us again. I was certain I could actually see the lump move slowly down Court's long neck as he took in this information. There are more of us, and Zendar has his claws in deep on many of them. How do you plan to stop him? That's none of your concern, little one. Watch over your brother and take care. Don't make us come back here. Yila narrowed her gaze at the young dragon, seemingly large and in charge. She was my kind of people. Or dragon. Whatever. Court nodded eagerly, lowering his gaze respectfully. Our 3 dragons seemed satisfied with this, and we continued down the path. Well, that was anticlimactic. After the next bend, we'll take to the skies again, Yila said. Court was untrained, with no handle on his magic. His thoughts projected loudly to me. And Zendar only has those he deems insignificant on the outskirts. The ones we need to worry about are with him at the 7th bend. Should I even ask at how you heard his thoughts? She was full of wonder. I loved it. The 3 dragons shared a look as if they were communicating telepathically, which wouldn't surprise me one bit. I think it's time you learned a little more about me, Yila said excitedly. Well, spit it out, woman. I'm supposed to be the queen of our dragon clan. Chapter 8. Once the shock wore off, I asked, what does supposed to be mean? And why are you helping us fight? Aren't you supposed to be locked away somewhere being protected? Yila sighed and shook her head. We are a monarch-led clan. There was a prophecy that a young male dragon would be born who would cause corruption within our ranks. The clan thought we locked away the dragon from the prophecy 2 centuries ago, but we took Zendar's dad. He was a teen when this happened, and he grew up to resent us and became very powerful. By the time we realized our mistake, it was too late. A few months ago, when Zendar reached his full power, he killed my mother, who was queen at the time. In our quest to stop him, my crowning has been overlooked. Queens in our clan do not stand on the sidelines during times of war. We fight alongside our people. Holy dragon babies, I did not see that coming. Where is Zendar's dad now? Yila lowered her head in sorrow. He poisoned himself and died a week before we realized our mistake. I believe that is what set Zendar off. He killed my mother right afterward.
Is this why you can do things I've never heard of other dragons doing before? Ryland asked.
Yes. Certain abilities are passed down from queen to queen. Each new matriarch receives her own special gift, as well as the gifts given before them.
What is your special gift? Oliver asked eagerly.
Hila grinned.
I cringed. Damn dragon didn't listen very well.
Land manipulation. It's how I was able to summon all of you to me. Ryland let out a low whistle.
That's impressive.
We made it to the next bend, and it was time to fly again. I was equal parts excited and nervous. I enjoyed flying and was anxious to stop Zendar, but after what we just learned, my guard was up even more, along with my nerves going a little haywire. This fight was personal for Zendar, which meant he was going to be reckless. This could go either way for us. Each of the dragons lowered their bodies, and the three of us quickly took our positions. Hila flapped her enormous wings first, leading the way toward the seventh bend of the river. Her body was stealthy, and the ride was smooth. Before I knew it, we were landing once more.
Why are we landing? I asked.
I need to summon more members of my clan. They have been waiting for my call since you arrived in Mineral Valley. They will help us keep Zendar's guards away from us while we move in. I wanted to ask more questions, but decided not to.
Hila needed to do her thing, and I wasn't going to be the one to stop her.
Her voice sang another hypnotic melody. Right as I was starting to feel lightheaded from it, Ryland and Oliver appeared next to me.
What's she doing? Ryland asked.
Calling for reinforcements. We waited for several minutes before Hila finally turned back to us. Everyone is in position now.
Wouldn't Zendar's dragons have heard if your own dragons were able to? Oliver asked.
Only the people linked directly to me can hear my call, and I only have the most loyal of dragons still tied to me. I promise you that. Dragon magic works in mysterious ways, a lot of which I cannot explain to someone who does not belong to our clan.
Hila had proven herself more than capable time and time again. I wasn't going to question her, and was glad when neither Ryland nor Oliver did.
So, we ready to do this? I said with a smirk on my face. Everyone else nodded their heads, and we mounted our dragon friends again. I was getting cozy until I felt Hila tense beneath me. I leaned forward and followed the direction of her stare. I couldn't see anything, so I peeked at Oliver and Ryland. They both seemed as confused as me, but Drake and Layden were looking in the same direction as Hila.
More dragons out there? I asked.
Hila rumbled deep in her chest.
No, a pest. Don't worry, I'll take care of him.
A full-on pout appeared on my face.
Way to rain on my parade, Queen Hila.
I wanted in on the action at some point. You'll get plenty of opportunity to let off some steam once we're at the seventh bend, I promise.
Well, that helped to cheer me up. Some.
Finally, I heard branches breaking and leaves on the ground crunching. I squinted and pulled myself further up Hila's back to get closer until I saw the head of a serpent.
Crap. I knew the bastard was going to show up again.
This thing was massive and moving quicker than I assumed its size would allow. Ebony scales covered its body, with small spikes running down the backside. Its beady yellow eyes met mine, and its mouth opened, revealing some nasty-looking fangs that dripped thick golden saliva. Chills ran across my body, and I was about to make Hila really annoyed with me, when the serpent was within striking distance. Hila and Layden both roared and shot fire out of their mouths. Heat carried with the wind toward me, and I scooted back to avoid getting burned. The serpent didn't seem bothered by the fire, and struck through the flames, but Drake flicked his tail, slamming the serpent back on the ground. With everyone else distracted, I launched off Hila's back and landed on the ground 20 or so feet below. The flames from one of the dragons had blinded the serpent, but his other senses didn't seem dulled as he moved for me.
"Jordan!"
Ryland yelled, but I ignored him as I focused on the monster coming at me. His forked tongue hissed, smelling the air. He might be able to know where I am, but the annoyance still couldn't see. I swung my sword out and chopped the front of his tongue off. The snake screeched, and its body jerked toward me. I didn't move fast enough, and its tail slammed into my ribs as I fell to the ground. Hila was moving toward us, and I knew I only had mere seconds to finish the serpent before she did it for me. Ignoring the ache in my side, I got back up and brought my own fire to the party. My sword flamed up, and I felt wind on my neck. Ryland must be pissed at me for interfering, but he had my back anyway. I launched myself forward, letting the wind do most of the work as I arced the sword and came down on the snake's head, my blade going through the middle. Hila was caught up then, and stomped on the back half of the serpent, breaking its spine and keeping it from hitting me again. When it stopped flinching and the head was almost all ash and bone from my flames, I withdrew my sword and walked toward Yila. She was glaring at me, but I didn't cower. That was my problem, and I needed to take care of it. You knew he was following you? I nodded. Titus, the ape who kidnapped me and told me to find your tunnels, also let me know about the serpent.
What?
Oliver and Ryland grumbled at the same time. Did I forget to tell you guys there was a giant snake following us? My bad. I grinned.
Seriously, Jordan?
Ryland rolled his eyes.
Can we get out of here now?
Yila blew smoke from her snout.
I won't say I'm thrilled with your choice, but I understand your reasons and respect them.
So we're good to finish dragon hunting? I asked as we walked away from the dead serpent.
I believe we are,
Yila replied. Chapter 9. As soon as the three of us were settled, the dragons took flight. We were once again on our way to find Zendar with hopefully no more distractions. Within 10 minutes, I could finally see the area we were headed. It was tucked next to the river with dense trees surrounding the opposite side. Off in the distance, there were fountains of lava and smoke plumes all across the dry land. I'd only been to the fire sector once before and had no desire to ever return. Except for the spots of forest next to the river that ran through, the rest of the land seemed post-apocalyptic. There was little to no vantage point from up here. I thought I saw massive boulders in the clearing, but as we got closer, I realized they were moving and not boulders at all. They were dragons, and not ones we wanted to have lunch with. Fan-freaking-tastic. We started to descend, and my adrenaline began pumping. I patted my back and boot, feeling for my weapons and making sure they were secure. Everything was in place. I glanced toward Ryland and Oliver. They flanked each side of me and Yila with Drake and Layden. Ryland's face was creased in concentration, his bronze hair tousled from the wind, and he looked as much the warrior as I knew him to be. Oliver's cobalt eyes met mine, and the grin I expected appeared on his youthful face. He was as eager for this fight as I was. As soon as we landed, I jumped off Yila and drew my sword. Ryland and Oliver did the same as they moved closer to me. Drake and Layden will stay behind us, watching our backs. Other members from my clan are coming from the opposite direction. We were the distraction for their discreet arrival. I want the three of you at my side. Do not venture off. Do not engage any of the dragons except Zendar. We will only get one chance at this, and we cannot fail. Yila leveled her silver eyes at each of us. I felt the power of her words weigh down on me, making me want to kneel before her. She was a powerful queen, and I had a feeling we'd only seen a fraction of her power. We nodded in agreement and followed Yila, as Drake and Layden disappeared behind us. I heard grunts and shouts from nearby, causing my body to tense. I didn't like being told I couldn't fight yet, but I trusted Yila. I would listen, for now. My magic stirred inside me, and I felt it flow freely from my core, through my arms, and out to my sword. Flames formed above the hilt, traveling up the blade, but staying small as I controlled the element. Oliver and Ryland each had their own swords in one hand, and deep ruby-red orbs in the other. Yila halted, her wings swinging out, and I almost cut right through her with my magic-filled sword. Damn, that was close. Why'd we stop? I asked in a low whisper. Yila didn't answer, but I continued to scan our surroundings, waiting for whatever she was concerned with. After several minutes, my patience was running thin. Ryland sensed my restlessness and placed his hand on my shoulder, calming me some. Okay, it's clear, Yila said, finally breaking the silence. What was that about? I asked with more attitude than she deserved from me, which made me cringe internally. Sometimes I couldn't stop my mouth. One of Zendar's dragons was up ahead. Drake and Layden took care of him for us, so we can continue on. My head whipped around, trying to sense them. I hadn't even heard a twig snap. For such massive beasts, they were sure as hell stealthy. Not that I don't trust your instincts, but why are you trying to prevent us from doing anything useful yet? I asked, and Oliver stifled a laugh. I shot him a glare as I waited for Yila's answer. We don't need to waste our energy when it isn't necessary. Battling Zendar will take everything you have and then some. Please try to trust me. I know the damage he is capable of firsthand. Way to be a jerk, I chided myself. Of course, Yila would know. She lost her mother the last time she faced Zendar. I needed to shut up and do as I was asked for once. Hila began moving again, and we followed without saying anything else. Ryland glared at me, basically saying with one look what I had already been thinking. I raised my hands up and shrugged. Nothing I could do about my lack of a filter after the fact. After several more stops and waiting on the other dragons to handle whatever was in our path, we finally made it to an enclosed area at the edge of a dying forest. Oliver cringed. "What's wrong?" I whispered. "I can't use the earth here to help us. It's too weak, and I can't ask it to make that sacrifice. The pain of everything is too much, and I'll be distracted." I patted his chest. "Your earth elements don't make you strong, Oliver. What's in there does. We got this." He seemed taken aback by my sudden kindness, but merely smiled and pulled me along without saying anything else. I hated that he didn't feel whole going into this fight, but with all three of us together, I knew we would be okay. I had to believe it, because there were no other options in my mind. We approached the perimeter of what I assumed was where Zendar was hiding. Large rocks were stacked together, creating a makeshift fence. We crept around it in time to see Drake and Layden taking out a dragon twice their size that stood in front of the entrance to whatever lay behind the rock wall. The fight between the three of them appeared to be touch and go. I stepped forward a couple times, but Ryland and Oliver slapped their hands on each of my arms before I could do anything. Drake was bleeding from 3 large gashes to his neck, and Layden had burn marks on his golden tail, along with a chunk of scales missing from his back left leg. I hoped their part in this was almost over because I didn't see how they could last much longer. Finally, they caught the dragon by surprise, and blood spurted across the gate as Drake raked his front claws down the dragon's neck. Once the guard was unmoving, we continued forward, and I kept my eyes away from the dead beast. Even though it was his life or ours, the humanity in me didn't enjoy seeing gutted dragons. Hila stopped at the gate, appearing to have one of those mental conversations with Drake and Layden again. They nodded and dragged the body of the guard dragon out of our way. I tried not to stare at the fallen dragon, but in the end, I couldn't help myself. I nearly gagged at the sight of internal body parts hanging out of the gaping hole Drake had caused, and regretted my very poor decision. "Once we enter this gate, there is no going back until we've defeated Zendar," Hila said solemnly. "We go in together, and we leave together. Do you understand?" Ryland, Oliver, and I nodded. That was how we went into every battle when it was just the three of us. No reason why we couldn't add Hila in as a no dragon queen left behind rule. We crept through the gate. Well, the three of us crept. Hila stomped. I liked her style better. I left the guys in the dust and kept pace with the dragon. She glanced down at me, nodding her approval of my place at her side. While we walked, I sent more magic through my sword until the flames began to lick at my fingers. As soon as I did, a loud roar erupted from somewhere up ahead, and heavy steps sounded, heading right toward us and causing vibrations in the ground as they got closer. We were about to come face to face with Zendar. I bounced on my toes, rotating my sword between hands as we, or at least I, waited eagerly to see the beast who'd been causing havoc on the innocents of the other world. Trees 2 or 3 feet in diameter snapped in half like they were mere twigs as Zendar plowed through his little fortress, ready to face whoever dared to enter his domain. His gaze landed on Hila first, then on me. He let out a chuckle so horrid I couldn't be sure if he was crying or laughing. It was quite pathetic, considering how much he had been talked up. His beady charcoal eyes did one more cursory glance at each of us before he came to a complete halt. His scales were midnight blue and scarred. His black claws were sharp, digging into the dirt beneath him. Lastly, his tail caught my attention. It appeared to have been mangled in battle at some point. Half of the end was missing, while the other was littered with more white scars.
"Hila, I'm disappointed in you," Zendar reproached. "You dare to face me, and the only backup you bring are guardians."
His tone gave way to his disgust, making me eager to shove my sword straight through his heart.
"I've learned a lot in my time away, and I don't need backup. Your reign of terror is ending today,"
Hila answered with all the confidence I hoped she truly felt. I was almost annoyed that she didn't tell him how awesome we were, and we most definitely weren't backup. We were the main event.
"Then what are you waiting for?"
Zendar spat. "Absolutely nothing." Hila charged, and my mouth gaped.
This was so not part of the plan. Zendar rose onto his hind legs, and when Yila came close enough, he slammed down, swinging his tail out and smacking her in the face. I cringed at the pain she had to be experiencing, but the fierce dragon queen persevered and kept moving forward as if nothing happened. Yila lifted her front leg and swiped out at Xander, but he evaded easily and quickly. I glanced at Ryland and Oliver, wondering what the hell we were supposed to do. Yila hadn't quite explained our role in this scenario, other than my sword needed to be the one to kill Zendar. Was I supposed to wait for her to tire him out, then go in for the kill, or join in whenever I felt like it? I wasn't one for sitting on the sideline, so I already had my answer. "You boys ready?" I asked as Yila and Zendar continued to exchange blow after blow, rotating between tail swings, claw gouging, and fire blasts. I so wasn't fond of the fire. It had heat unlike my own that was laced with something dark. "We've got your back," Ryland said with a fierce look of determination. But before we could move in to assist Yila, Drake and Layden came tumbling through the gates with 3 dragons pushing in on them. Drake's right front leg was dangling at an awkward angle, and he was attempting to fight without putting pressure on it. Layden had multiple streams of blood running down his back from several gashes, losing more fluid than I imagined his body should. I looked back at Yila. She was still handling Zendar on her own with only minor abrasions. We had to help Drake and Layden first. "The 3 of us need to tag team the 3rd dragon," I said. "Once we have it mostly handled, then one of us needs to break off and help Drake or Layden, whoever looks worse off at the time." They gave curt nods, and we sprinted to help our new friends. A look of relief appeared in Drake's eyes as he saw us coming to their aid. I leapt first at the 2nd dragon, who was tag-teaming Drake with another. He hadn't seen us coming, his focus primarily on hurting our friends. I raised my sword, flames increasing by the second, and swiped at the scales where Drake or Layden had already done damage. I pushed my magic through the sword as it connected with the dragon, and a smell of burnt skin filtered through the air. A fierce howl escaped from the beast, and I quickly retreated. As I regained momentum, Ryland and Oliver ran in as well. Ryland slid under the dragon, slicing from one end of his belly to the other, using his wind elements to push him further along. Oliver charged for its neck, swiftly slicing, then turning back around to throw an orb at it. I was glad he knew he didn't need the earth elements to still be a badass. I was coming back in, focused on the injury Oliver had made. My aim was set to make the wound a deadly one with my sword. But I made the mistake of only concentrating on my target and not on my surroundings. "Jordan, look out!" Ryland yelled, but it was too late. One of the other dragons whipped its tail out and gut-checked me. My breath was knocked out of me as I soared through the air, and my head smacked hard against a nearby tree when I landed. I quickly realized that, at some point during my flight time, my grip on the sword had loosened, and it was nowhere to be seen. Crap! Oliver cradled my head and lifted me. My vision was blurry, but nothing hurt more than what I could handle in the moment, with adrenaline urging me on. "You okay?" he asked. "I'll be fine as long as I get payback." I continued to let him help me up and searched for my sword. I couldn't see it anywhere and was beginning to panic. This was so not good. I'd have to find it after we eliminated one of the 3 dragons. Otherwise, our usefulness here was about to end. I pulled my dagger from my boot and called my magic until it made an angry red flaming orb. I was pissed, and this was going to hurt that ugly-ass dragon. I crept up behind the one who had hit me as Ryland and Oliver went back to the beast we had started with. Layden saw me coming in and kept the dragon's attention off me. I crawled beneath the brute and found several deep cuts from Layden's claws already there, but none of them had slowed this dragon down. I slid further toward where I assumed his heart was and steadied my aim. I had one chance at this. Otherwise, I was likely going to get squished by the massive beast. The dragon kept moving its feet as it continued to battle with Layden, but I managed to stay unnoticed. Once I felt confident and the dragon stilled momentarily, I thrust my dagger up and continued to push with all my strength until even my hand was fully immersed in dragon guts. Once I was satisfied with the depth, I pulled my blade out and shoved my other hand holding the orb right where my dagger had been. Once the orb was in place, I retreated quickly. The dragon froze, and Layden backed up as well. Within seconds, the chest cavity of the creature blew out, causing minced dragon meat to fly everywhere. I'd had my revenge, but the job wasn't even close to over. Layden moved on to help Drake, while Ryland and Oliver were just finishing up with the 3rd dragon. I retraced the path I had been thrown down earlier in search of my sword, but came up empty once again. I glanced back at Yila and Zendar, and my breath caught.
Zendar was throwing her around like a rag doll. Crap, I need to find the sword. Oliver and Ryland joined me in my search, while Drake and Layden made sure all 3 dragon guards were unconscious or dead. Got it, Oliver called out. I turned and saw him pulling it from the bushes about 50 yards from where I had landed. I must have hit harder than I thought. I thanked the fates for adrenaline pumping through my veins right then, or I'd probably be crying like a baby. Oliver ran over to us with sword in hand. He bent over at the waist, offering the sword like a gentleman. I laughed and smacked his shoulder. Thank you, Sir Oliver. Now, let's go kill one last dragon. They both grinned at me and nodded. Drake and Layden joined us then, looking much worse than I originally thought. You two need to stand down, I said, knowing my words would have no effect, but wanting to try anyway.
Good luck with that, Guardian, Drake said. Our job is to protect the Queen, and we will do it until our dying breath.
I nodded, understanding their commitment. I just hoped that last dying breath wasn't going to be anytime soon. Drake and Layden charged off toward Yila without another word. Drake wobbled while he ran, keeping weight off his injured leg, but still managing to keep up with Layden. Adrenaline and commitment made a body do things most would never think possible. The 3 of us held back until we figured out how Drake and Layden were going to play this out. Zendar had Yila backed into a corner at the base of an oversized boulder. By the time he raised his front leg to deliver another blow, Layden charged in and knocked Zendar to the ground.
Why aren't you imbeciles dead yet?
Zendar roared. He opened his mouth, emitting a solid stream of fire at Layden, catching him completely by surprise with Zendar's quick recovery. The blaze smacked Layden between the eyes, causing me to let out an audible gasp. The golden dragon went down like a sack of bricks, and Yila roared in pain, while Drake stepped in to get Layden out of the way. The 3 of us charged once we recovered from the initial shock of what had happened. Layden's head had been incinerated. There was no way he could survive that, even with all the magic in the world. Without looking at Layden's upper half, the 3 of us helped Drake push his dragon friend out of the way. He didn't deserve to be trampled on in our attempt to defeat Zendar. Once he was under the trees, Drake lowered his head to Layden's chest.
He may not have survived this, but he went out the only way a true warrior wishes, protecting their queen. This is an honorable death for him. First, his life will be avenged, then celebrated.
Drake's voice was devoid of all emotion, but his eyes were filled with sorrow. I reached my hand out to his front leg. Let's get the avenging part finished, so we can get to the celebrating. Drake gave Layden one more glance. Then we all charged toward Yila and Zendar again. We had to finish the job without any other casualties, because if anything happened to one of my guys, I wouldn't survive that heartbreak. Chapter 10. Yila had the advantage this time when we turned back toward her. Zendar had empowered her by taking out Layden, making Yila an even more formidable opponent. Drake took the lead, and I was happy to let him have it. His leg already seemed to be healing, but I could tell it pained him to walk on it. Regardless, I was pleased to see the trails of blood dry up. I sat back, trying to figure out Yila and Drake's game plan. Zendar was now outnumbered, but he was still keeping his own. They flanked him, taking turns breathing fire at each other or swiping for low cuts. I couldn't figure out where the guys and I were supposed to fit in, so I decided to just make it happen. No more waiting. This was ending now. You guys remember that one time in practice when you threw me on the roof?
Yeah,
Ryland said, uncertain of where I was going with this. Let's do that again, but this time I need you to throw me on top of a dragon who wants to eat us for dinner. Both their faces paled, and they shook their heads. Oliver spoke up first.
No way. Yila said she'd tell you when to go in. Just wait for her.
Look at them. They're too evenly matched. We have to do something to push the odds in our favor. Unless you have another way, then sending me flying for the dragon seems like the only viable option. Obviously, I can't sneak up on him with a flaming sword. They both groaned, and I knew I had them. They couldn't deny this was the best idea we were going to come up with.
Fine, but if you turn into dragon food, I request the right to carve "I told you so" into your headstone,
Oliver said, and I grinned. I would welcome it. We got into formation, and I sheathed my sword for the flight to prevent accidentally impaling myself on landing. That would be no good for anyone.
On the count of 3,
Ryland said. I nodded and stepped onto their palms and steadied myself. I knew exactly where I wanted to land. I just had to hope my guys still had good aim. They loved me enough to want to keep me alive, so that should be motivation enough to do it right the first time. I hoped. On 3, I went soaring. I got the attention of Yila, and her eyes widened as I grinned at her and waved. Then, my attention was back to the evil dragon I was currently being propelled toward, and I braced myself for impact. Thankfully, he was as wide as a semi-truck, and I landed with a thud in the middle of his back on my hands and knees. Zendar flicked his head back and roared. I sat up and swiftly unsheathed my sword, smirking at the side-eye he was tossing my way. "Good day to die?" I asked, as flames once again walked up my blade.
"I don't know. Why didn't you ask Layden?" he countered, and I cringed.
This oversized psycho needed to die immediately. Before I could finish powering up my sword, Zendar bucked wildly and shot blazing flames at me. I flattened my stomach on his back, attempting to make myself as small as possible, but before I could pull my legs in, his fire grazed my ankles and feet. I wanted to scream out because it burned like a mother, but I kept the hurt locked in, using it to push me forward. I army crawled toward the base of his neck, where Yila had already done some damage. I heard shouts from in front of Zendar. Rylan and Oliver were making a ruckus and throwing orbs in an attempt to get Zendar's attention off me. Wind blew past me, likely from Ryland. I picked up my pace. By the time I reached where I wanted, my sword was completely charged and ready for action. I couldn't stand on my feet because they'd been burned by the flames, even worse than I thought. Breathing through the agony was harder with every pant I took, but I wouldn't let myself dwell on the dark thoughts for long. Instead, I grasped onto the thoughts that consisted only of killing Zendar and pushed myself up on my knees again, falling over several times as the beast continued to evade the blows he was being dealt by my friends and the Dragon Queen. Wind arched around my back, but instead of knocking me over, the pressure came from both sides, holding me up. I sent a silent thanks to Ryland as I focused back on the task before me. I hoped like hell Yila was right, and this sword really was special enough to kill the beast beneath me. If not, I was going to start saying my final goodbyes because there was no way I was making it out of here if Zendar didn't die. "Now!" Yila roared. I sank the long blade as deep as it would go at the base of Zendar's neck and held on tight. The hilt heated in my grip, and Zendar began to flail like a bucking bronco. Even though I could feel blisters forming from the heat, my hold tightened. The fear of getting trampled was stronger than that of getting more burns I was hopeful could be healed. Zendar continued to roar and twist beneath me, while Oliver, Ryland, and Yila delivered hit after hit. Just as I began to think Yila was wrong and all my sword had done was piss this dude off, Zendar stilled. "Jordan, jump off!" Ryland screamed at me, but I couldn't move. My hands were glued to the sword. I pulled with all my might, uncaring if I lost all the skin on my palms, but they wouldn't budge. Zendar's body began to shake uncontrollably, and my eyes widened. What the hell was happening, and why couldn't I let go? Soon, I realized my body was being siphoned of magic. The sword was continuing to pull from my well of power in the process of destroying Zendar. I cried out in pain when it became too much, no longer able to hold in the anguish of all my injuries. I could hear Ryland and Oliver frantically yelling for me, but there was nothing I could do except hope I survived. My body slumped against the sword, and I gave up trying to fight the pain. Instead, I let it consume me until my energy was zapped. Then suddenly, everything stilled. Zendar stopped shaking. My hold was released from the sword. Our surroundings were eerily quiet. But before I could do anything or celebrate, my world exploded. Literally. I was once again flying through the air, surrounded in blood, scales, and guts. Disgusting. I had nothing left in me to brace for impact. I didn't even have time to think of any smart-ass last words. The speed in which I was traveling didn't fare well for me at all. I closed my eyes, picturing those I loved most and remembering Drake's earlier words. I was going out like a warrior, and it brought a smile to my face just as I slammed into something soft. What the hell? I opened my eyes and screamed a few obscenities when I realized I was floating in the sky, stuck and unable to move. Yila and the others approached as I was slowly lowered to the ground. My feet winced as I touched down, and I bit back a few other choice words before falling to my knees. Ryland and Oliver ran over to me as soon as I reached the ground. They each hugged me gently, and I knew I appeared just as horrid as I felt. "What can we do for you?" Ryland asked, and I appreciated him not asking if I was okay. Obviously, I was far from it, so I might have smacked him if he had. "I can't walk. Bastard singed my feet. Now, treat me like the princess you always call me, and carry me. There's our girl. Oliver smirked. She's going to be all right. Hila nudged me with her oversized snout, and I reached up to place my hand on her head. Her eyes had everything I needed to know. I nodded my understanding, not needing words to feel her appreciation of our help here. How did I stop from shattering my entire body against one of those trees? I asked, wondering if Ryland had done some quick thinking, or if it was more dragon magic. Hila spoke first. I used a shield. Normally, they're used for catching trespassers. It's meant to keep someone trapped until the creator of the shield releases them. I hadn't been sure it would work, but I'm thankful it did. So I was alive due to pure luck. I had a few things to say about that, but before I could, Ryland carried me over to Drake, who stood next to Layden's lifeless body. My concerns for how I was saved weren't more important than the respect Layden deserved from us. We had a moment of silence for him until Hila spoke several minutes later. There is much to do, and Jordan needs to see a healer. Drake, will you stay here with Layden until I can bring others back to help with the fallen? Drake nodded. Ryland and Oliver, you'll need to hold Jordan on my back, so I can take you to the nearest healer. I saw the uncertainty in Ryland's face before he spoke. Do you mind taking us to a gateway instead? We have a very capable healer in Arvada, and we'd really like to get back home. Very well, but I hope one day you'll come back to visit. After your assistance today, I certainly owe you a debt. Ryland agreed to our return, and they got me situated on Hila. I was glad he had spoken up. I was ready for my bed, and when my feet healed, a day at the spa. I could feel dragon bits in places they most certainly didn't belong. There wasn't a lot of space for Hila's wings to fully expand, so once we were comfortable on her back, she moved for the gate. As soon as she made it through, she stopped short, and I lifted my head in an attempt to see what caused her to pause. There are dragons everywhere, Ryland whispered. Seriously? Could this day get any worse? Wait, they're bowing. One by one, they're all kneeling for their queen. It's okay, Oliver added. Oh, thank the fates. I couldn't handle another evil dragon today. I settled into my best friends and closed my eyes. I was done thinking or doing for the time being. I needed sleep, stat. With the knowledge that my guys were watching my back, I drifted off, more thankful than ever to be headed to Arvada. Chapter 11. 2 weeks later, I was no longer a fan of our healer. Laurel might be powerful, but she had horrible bedside manner. Now move your toes, she demanded. Okay, maybe I was a little to blame for her curtness. I might have called her every insulting name I could think of while I went through hell during the healing process. My feet had nearly been melted off, and I hadn't been able to properly use my hands for nearly a week. If I hadn't had my tough-as-nails boots when Zendar burned me, Laurel was certain I'd have lost them both. I cringed at that thought every time it crossed my mind, which was often. Finally, I wiggled my toes for her. This was my last visit. After several magical reconstruction surgeries performed by the wench herself, my feet and ankles were finally working together again. The only positive thing about all this was that Ryland and Oliver had been my slaves, and I hadn't had to get out of bed unless I wanted to, which wasn't often. So she's all healed? Oliver asked anxiously. Laurel nodded. She'll have some residual numbness, but that will go away in time. Other than that, I don't need to see her anytime soon, unless she decides to tangle with dragons again. I rolled my eyes. I'd like to see her go against the scaled beasts and come out unscathed. Thank the fates. Oliver turned to me. I'm out of here. Don't ask me for anything for a solid month. Quit being a baby. I wasn't that bad. He glared at me. Okay, maybe I was, but I totally saved the day. I deserved the special treatment. Whatever you say, princess. Before I could respond, Oliver disappeared from the room. I glanced over at Laurel as I slid off the medical table. Thank you for all your work. I wouldn't have trusted anyone else. You're lucky I didn't give you a sixth toe. Laurel appeared serious, and I stared at her with my mouth hanging open until she smirked. You actually handled that better than most men. I'm used to being yelled at when I'm breaking bones and moving things back where they belong. Your name-calling was merely entertainment to this old lady. I leaned in and hugged her hard. I'll try not to find myself in here again, and I'll make sure to mention to the men they need to toughen up. Laurel laughed, long and hard. Let me know how they take that. I nodded. I'll see you around. Thanks again. For the first time in much too long, I walked out of the room on my own. As easy as it would be to port home, I wanted to test my feet and make sure they really were all healed up. Laurel lived about a mile from home, which was just the right amount of distance to test my newly restored toes without overdoing it. I pushed up until I bounced on the balls of my feet and stretched out my ankles. Things were still tight, but there was no pain for once. After a few stretches, I began my walk. I made it to the heart of Arvada, where most of the businesses were, but I went around the long way. I knew people would want to stop and talk, and I wasn't up for that just yet. I'd had nightmares almost every night, reliving the fight with the dragons. It was too close of a call for even me to just play the battle off as no big deal like I normally did. Yila had asked us to come back, but I wasn't sure when I'd mentally be ready for that. Before I knew it, I was walking up the yard to the house. I kicked off my shoes, and the grass felt amazing beneath my feet. I lay down in the lawn and stretched some more. Nothing was painful, but it was certainly sore. I was going to have my work cut out for me, trying to get back in shape from 2 weeks off. When I was done with my stretches, I headed up to my room. I landed on my bed with a huff and decided a nap after my walk was a good idea. As I rolled onto my side, fluffing my pillow, there was a letter on my nightstand. "Don't touch it. Just go to sleep," I told myself. But curiosity got the better of me. With a deep sigh, I reached over to grab the paper before sitting up. My name was scrolled across the front of folded parchment that was too crisp to be from anyone other than the council. Gingerly, I unfolded the single page. Ms. Baker, the Atwaters have been attacked with the focus being toward their daughter. A dark witch who has already been dealt with attempted to drown Kalia and was near success before Delilah found her at the falls. She and Brooks are worried about Kalia's continued safety on Earth and have requested a protector for her. Their magic was revealed during the encounter, and we had to remove some of her memory. The action is not something we want to happen again, due to the lasting effects it could have. This is the second attack on their family since they left Arvada, and we need your help to make sure there isn't a third one. You will be sent to live near them with pseudo-guardian parents and, using a glamour, will appear the same age as Kalia, growing as she does. You will become her closest friend, and, without her knowledge, her protector. Your presence is expected by the week's end. Prepare what you need and expect to be gone until Kalia's 19th birthday. If you wish to decline this summoning, please see us immediately, as there isn't a moment to waste when it comes to the young princess's safety. With respect, the Council. I had 0 words. How? Why? And princess? Most days it was easy to forget we used to have a monarchy rule, but with the Council's use of princess, I assumed it meant Kalia was going to be more than just the daughter of people I cared deeply for. She was going to be important to our world. I needed Ryland and Oliver. I was going to be gone for 8 years. Even though we aged way slower than any human once we acquired our full magical powers, I had no desire to be gone from my best friends and my life here for that long. I'd do it, but it didn't mean I had to be happy about it. Hopefully, Brooks and Delilah had raised a kid I could actually get along with. After checking the guest house, I ported to Oliver's house, hoping Ryland would be there too. As I walked in the door, sensing them both, I'd never been more thankful to see my best friends. "What's wrong?" Ryland asked, as he took in the expression on my face. I explained to them what the letter had said and what I was supposed to do. They both remained quiet until I was done, which made me nervous. I needed them to be upset about this. "The situation certainly isn't ideal, but Brooks and Delilah have done a lot for us," Ryland said. "I knew they were having some issues, but I didn't realize it had gotten this severe. I'd go in your place if I could, but I'm not the one who received the letter. Look on the bright side. You can go shopping whenever you want on Earth." A smile appeared on my face, and I hugged Ryland first, then Oliver. "I'm going to miss you guys." "It's going to be boring without you, but we'll come visit when we can," Oliver said, making me feel better. Ready or not, I was headed to Earth. Kalia better be ready for her world to be turned upside down. I wasn't going to go easy on her. Even if she wasn't allowed to know magic existed until it was time for her to come home to Arvada, I'd do what I could to prepare her for this world. By the time I was done with her, she'd be the most badass princess Arvada had ever seen. This has been Of Swords and Dragons, Royal Fae Guardians, written by Heather Renee, narrated by Vanessa Moyen. Copyright 2020 by Heather Renee. Production copyright 2020 by Heather Renee.